Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. This is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today we're going to put on our Bob Ross hats and make some happy trees using the new plant object inside of Cinema 4D. We'll do a run through of all the new settings for this tool. It just came out in the most recent update. And for those of you who are watching this video a little bit later, keep in mind that if I do see any updates to this tool, I will leave links to videos on those updates in the description of this video, in case if I need to build on this one in the future and something new comes out about it. But for right now, we're going to go through everything about it today. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. Let's go ahead and make some happy little trees. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. I'm going to be talking about this really cool tool over here that allowed me to make this tree. You can also use it for other types of plants. This is really useful for animations, if you're working on any architectural renders and you need to drop in some plants for a rendering of a house or some kind of commercial building. This comes in super handy. I think it's really exciting that this came out. And it has so many customizable options in here. And it comes with your Maxon 1 license, so that's awesome. You don't need a plugin for this. And in the asset browser, so you can open and close your asset browser by hitting this button here. I just like to show you that if you search Laubwerk, now I don't know if I'm pronouncing this perfectly because I do not speak German, but it's spelled Laubwerk, and you'll see all of these files come up. Now, these are customizable inside of your asset browser, and that's really the exciting thing about it. And you can customize these using a handy-dandy generator, and you can find this generator here, Create, in your Create menu under Generator. You'll see that you have down here this new icon, plant. So this is super helpful, and that's what I was using in here. And you'll see when you have this in your scene, you get all these customizable options. So for right now, I have this tree that I made just as an example. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And then I'm going to delete it because we're going to do this from scratch and talk a little bit about how this works. I'll delete these little flowers I have down here as well. And I'm just going to delete most of what I have in here. So that way we are keeping things nice and neat. I made this surface here. This is just simply a tube. You can find your tubes in here. Tube, and it's also a cylinder. And I put them together to create this little base for the tree and the flowers, but you can really make whatever you'd like. This is just what I'm using here for today. So if you were to go into the Create menu, drop in the plant, so I'll just click on this here, you'll notice that it's red. And the reason why it's red is Cinema 4D is letting you know that it is not linked to any specific plant. So you actually need to select a plant to link it to. And there's a couple ways that you can go about this, but in here, when you have plant clicked on, you'll see in your attributes manager, you have these tabs. Within your object tab, you'll see plant. And by the way, you'll notice this is keyframeable. So you can animate this option. You can animate any of these options with the little diamonds next to them. If I click on Browse Plants, it'll open up the same plants we have in our asset browser that you can see here. So you'll see that I have flowers, I have trees, and let's pick a tree today. We'll talk about this one. I'm going to click on this one. This was actually the one I had made before. And then once I do that, you'll see that it turns green. I have a tree loaded. It's all good and wonderful. And I want to drop in another tree, so I'll do that. But first I'll raise this up. If you hit the E key, you'll get these little arrows and you can move objects around by clicking on them. So I have this tree in here, and you'll notice that it looks very blocky. This isn't how it's going to look when it renders. If I choose to render the current frame, I'm just going to keep it on these settings for right now. Not anything too fancy. You'll see that it's rendering out as the full tree. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in here, but do not panic if your tree looks like this in your viewport. It's all good. That's how it's supposed to look. So there you go. We've got a really nice tree. You can see that the leaves are really nice. And I got these textures, the dirt and the stone one, those actually just came from the asset browser too. So if you just search dirt or stone, you'll be able to find these in there. They're Redshift materials that come with your Max on 1 license. I'm going to go ahead and hide that here for a minute. So the important thing to know about what's controlling that is you have these render modes and editor mode. So render mode is set to full geometry. So that's when you see all the leaves, all the details, you get those polygons. But let's say you're building a forest inside of Cinema 4D and you don't want it to slow down your viewport. That's why the editor mode is set to convex hull, which is what we're seeing here. This blobby tree shape is called convex hull. It's a way to visualize your tree without it overwhelming your computer or just taking up less data, especially if you're going to have hundreds of these. But we'll talk a little bit later some ways to manage your trees so that you don't crash your computer. Some different options on how you can do it. But for right now, this is one of them, is to use the convex hull. There's this other option, skeleton, for editor mode. And this is basically made up of points. If I were to try to render this in the viewport, it'll use the editor mode. So it's updating, it's showing what it showed before. You'll see that this is actually made up of a bunch of points, and you don't actually see it with the IPR render. But again, if you were to render this to the picture viewer, you would get the fully detailed tree as we did before, because what's controlling the picture viewer is the render mode. And this is the render to picture viewer button right over there. And I'm just rendering the current frame. So on the output, I have current frame chosen. So that's important to keep in mind. We also have render geometry, and then that will show the full geometry of the tree in the viewport. And if we choose start IPR, you'll actually see the tree in here. So that is what the options are. These skeleton and convex hull, they just save you some memory. If your computer's lagging, you might want to use one of these for your editor, but you can still render it out with its full geometry later if you'd like to. For the full geometry options, for the render mode, you have the option of full geometry and convex hull, so you can choose either one of those. Maybe you'd use the convex hull if you're just quickly showing a client something and you don't want to have it render as long or be as dense of a scene. But I think in most cases, I just use the full geometry because not all clients will understand what those blobby shapes are, and it helps them to visualize it. let's talk about this model here. So this is the really exciting part, I feel like, because each one of these files, these special files for plants, they come with 3 different versions, and they come with 3 different ages for those 3 different versions of the tree. And you can see a little visualization of what the tree is here, as well as the scale, because they have this little person next to it. If we choose young, you'll see this is a younger version of the tree. And this is variant 1. This is this tree middle-aged, variant 1 middle-aged, variant 1 full-grown. So you can have the tree in 3 different ages, which is really nice. And you have 3 different variations of that. So we have a variant 2. In case if you need multiples of these trees and you don't want them to all look the same. So let's say you need 3 younger trees next to each other, or a few trees next to each other. I'm going to actually hold Control and duplicate this. Let's say I want to have 3 young trees. Now we have 3 options. So I'll make this one variant 1, and I have this other one here that's variant 2. I'll make a copy of this, and I'll make this one variant 3 young. And then what if you run into the problem, well, I want 4 trees and I want them to all look different. A really nice hack for that is you just make a copy, you rotate it at a different angle, and then we have the optical illusion of these being different trees because we're seeing a different side of it. And that helps create that illusion that this one is in fact a different tree than this one. So artists do that all the time to keep the number of assets they need a little bit lower, but creating that illusion that they aren't just copying and pasting existing assets. They'll rotate them a little bit, sometimes scale them a little bit so that they look different. I'm going to go ahead and delete these other trees. And we're going to go through some more options you have for this. So you can choose what season it is. I'm going to turn on the IPR here for a moment. I'm also going to hit save because sometimes my computer doesn't like me rendering as well as recording at the same time. I'll go ahead and hit this button here. And I'm going to actually choose a variant 1 full grown for this and adjust the season here. So you can see right now we have the season set to spring. So this is what the tree would look like in spring. Each one of these trees come with a different season. So we could switch this to summer, and it'll update here in a moment. So that's summer. That's what the tree looks like in the summer. Let's try fall. This is the fall. And we have winter. So this is really useful because you can make this match whatever season it is in your render and know what type of tree it is. You have that kind of control over how old it is. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the IPR for a moment here. Let's talk about leaf density. So if I decrease the density of the leaves, sometimes it takes a moment to update. Maybe I'll actually make this 50. You'll see that the leaves reduce. So if you find that your computer's lagging, this is another option, is you can reduce your leaf density. You'll actually see your points and your polygons for this tree down here at the bottom, right here. So that's really important to keep in mind. You can keep track of how heavy this object is getting within your scene. One trick that people sometimes do if they feel like they want their tree to look like it has more leaves, but they want fewer polygons, is they'll reduce this leaf density to something smaller. Let's try 25. And then to compensate for there being fewer leaves, you can go ahead and update this leaf amount under the Detail tab. So in the Object tab, you have your leaf density. In the Detail tab, you have your leaf amount. And if you reduce this number, let's try 75. You'll see that it actually makes the leaves a little bit bigger, so it creates the illusion that there's more leaves, but it's really just scaling up the leaves. But by reducing the leaf density, you're reducing the polygons, and then you're creating the illusion that there's more leaves by just making the leaves a little bit bigger. So that is one way you can also help reduce lag for your computer and speed things up, prevent your computer from crashing. I'm going to set the leaf amount back to the default, which is 100%. You can actually set any one of these settings back to the default by right-clicking on this arrow, and then it sets it back to the default. So there we are, back to the default. And I like there being a lot of leaves. I'll put that back to 100%. This use document scale is really important. So this setting actually confuses a lot of people inside of Cinema 4D. So it's just good to be aware of how the document scale works. Now there's two places you need to be aware of for here. If you hit Control D, that will open up your project scenes. So that's the hotkey for it, Control D. If you're working on a Mac and not a PC like me, it's Command D. It'll take you to the same place though. And under your scale, you'll see that the project scale is 1 and then the unit is centimeters. But you can set it to any one of these. Now, what this is controlling is the actual scale of the project. It's not going to control the units you see when you make adjustments. That setting's in a different area. So where that is within the Edit menu, Preferences, under Units. So under Units, you'll see your display for your units, and you can choose a unit in here. Right now I have centimeters turned on. If you want to use a different set of units, it's good to make those adjustments before working, before you create a tree, before you create anything. That's a really important troubleshooting thing to be aware of. Make sure that your units are set correctly so that everything looks proportional. Otherwise, then you might have to scale things up and down manually in here. And that just takes a little bit more effort. I mean, you can do it to correct things. You could also scale the project. But if you have multiple sizes of objects that weren't imported correctly or not the correct dimensions, it just makes things complicated and makes it hard. So I think it's good to just always start off your project with the right units. So let's go back to our happy tree over here. Use document scale. You can also turn this off and choose to use a custom scale. So I can adjust the size of the tree here. I'm going to use the document scale, so you can see that you can scale these individually. They're very customizable, and you might want to do that if you have multiple trees, and that's another way to make some differentiation between them if you want two trees to look different. Even if they're the same variant, that's one way to do it. You could also do it through adjusting the leaf density. You could do a combination of things, rotate it, and that kind of thing. I'm going to set this back to use document scale, and we're going to go through the Detail tab. Now, I think these will be easier to see if we set the tree to have fewer leaves, and the most convenient way to do that is to make it winter, I feel. So now we have this winter tree, and we can see all these detailed little branches in here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the options we have for the branches. If you check on these boxes that say Use, you'll give yourself the ability to adjust these grayed out settings. So I'll go ahead and check this on. And once again, you'll notice that these have keyframes by them, which means you can keyframe them by just clicking on that diamond. You'll set a keyframe for this. So that's pretty cool. Minimum branch thickness. So let's show how this works. The minimum branch thickness right now is 1 centimeter. I'm going to hold the Alt key so that I reduce this in smaller increments while clicking this arrow here. And you'll see that as I make the number smaller, it's allowing for those smaller little twiggy-like branches to appear, because we are setting the minimum branch thickness, so it just makes the smaller branches basically disappear when you increase this. I'm going to turn on the maximum branch depth so that we can talk about that. So along a branch, it has these points where the branch splits into more branches. And when you are adjusting the branch depth, you're adjusting how many times these branches can split into other branches. So here at the base, it splits. Here at this branch, it splits. So how many times are these allowed to split is the branch depth. And if I decrease this, you'll see that we have fewer branch depths allowed in here. And if we have 1, it feels like we just have the base of the tree basically. But if I increase this, it allows for that greater detail. So this is another way to save your computer some polygons and points. So it depends on your project. You might find, I really need those detailed branches for this section of the animation because we have an animated bird that's sitting on a branch, and I really want to show the detail of that bird in the tree and those branches. Then in that case, you'll want to show all of that. If the camera's really far out looking at a forest and no one's going to see these tiny branches, you don't want them making your render take longer, so you'll want to reduce the number of branches to save you some memory. So that's really important for troubleshooting in here, your computer crashing. Nobody likes that happening. So just by knowing these settings, you can really save yourself a lot of headaches because you'll know how to fix problems for your given project. We have more options in here. We have subdivision by level. Now we won't really see these unless if we change our display mode. So the default is garage shading. If you click on one of these options here that says lines, you'll be able to see the polygons. So these little polygons made up by these lines, that's what we're going to be adjusting here when we talk about subdivisions. And there's a couple different ways for us to do these subdivisions. While we're looking at the lines of this tree, you have this option by level. I'm going to increase this to 3, and that will subdivide these 3 times. And when you're subdividing them 3 times by level, it'll focus more of the subdivisions along the areas that are curved, more curved, rather than straight. And that helps you prioritize the curved areas to have more polygons, because curves usually need more polygons. They need more edges to show that detail. And how many times you subdivide those polygons is this number here. You have this other option, uniform. Now this one does not prioritize by curvature. It just keeps it uniform throughout the tree based on the base of a branch. So increasing your subdivisions, that will increase the number of polygons you have, but again, you need to decide what works best for your project. So that are unique to the plant object. You have the usual settings under the basic tab and the coordinates. These are the same for all the generator objects. And the Fong tag I covered in another episode. So if you want to know about that, you can check that out, and I'll leave a link to that. Something else that I'd like to show really quickly is that you can also use this with other types of trees and what they look like as they age. So you could choose something that looks a little bit more like a pine tree. So I'm going to pick this one here. And this time I'm going to select it from the asset browser, and you'll see another way to import it. So I'll just double click on this. You can see that it's downloading the asset. And I'm just going to turn off this other tree here by selecting that check mark. So right now we have this one in here. And I'm going to choose, instead of convex hull for our editor mode, render geometry, so that you can see it a little bit easier, the adjustments here. Because these ones are interpreted a little bit differently in terms of season. So I just want to go ahead and show that. I'm going to hit IPR. So this is the summer version. This is spring. So you can see that the needles look a little bit different during the different seasons. Fall. And then there's winter. So even these pine trees that have a more subtle shift throughout the year, there are changes, and adjusting the season can also adjust the number of pine cones that you may see in the tree. So it does make a difference, and I just want you to be aware of that. It changes the needle color, the amount of needles a little bit. It just looks a little bit different in the different seasons. You can also work with things like flowers in here. So if we wanted to add in some flowers. Oh, these are so pretty. I'm going to click on these ones down here and load them up. You'll see that whenever I click on something here, it automatically creates the plant generator, and it automatically brings in all the materials for it. You can see that they're downloading in here. If you click on this, that's how you open and close your materials, in case if you're new here. Many of you already know that, but I want to make sure that anyone can follow along with these, even if this is their first week in Cinema 4D. We have this really cool plant here. I'm going to press play. On the IPR, oh, I need to change this from convex hull to render geometry again. And all the settings for the flowers work about the same as for the trees. You know, you have this leaf density option here, so I could decrease this, and you'll see this looks a little bit different when it updates. So you could see it looks like it has fewer leaves and such when you decrease the leaf density. So all the settings apply the same to flowers. So if you're working on something with flowers, that's something important to keep in mind. So I have one more little quick tip that I think you may find helpful, and that is relating to instances. If you go ahead and decide you want a ton of these trees, but you don't want them to cause lag within your scene, like let's say you could be cloning them, or you might be making copies of them with an instance. there's two different kinds of instance. Regardless of which one you're using, you'll see that you have different instance modes. Instance is good for if you're doing animation, but if you aren't, it's really good to use the render instance or multi-instance, depending on your situation. Because that way, you can make duplicates of this. So basically what you want to do though is if you're using the instance, it's good to have the object that you'd like to make an instance of first, and then click on that. I'm using Shift-C to pull up the manager. You can also find these listed in here though, the instance. So I'll just make a duplicate of that. And then you'll see that we have another one of these, and I made a whole other video going through the details on instances if you want to learn more about that and the different types of instances. So I will leave a link down below to that tutorial. But this way you don't have as many polygons in your scene. This one is referencing the first model instead of having additional polygons calculated. So it's a really helpful tool. You just need to make sure that you turn on render instance here, and it'll work much better. I suggest the render instance over the multi-instance because the multi-instance doesn't always look right. But this one is pretty predictable and works pretty well. In the cloner here, you'll see that you have render instance and multi-instance as options as well. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and show it with the flower, so I'll drop the flower in here. And now you can see that we have multiple flowers. So in our cloner, if I have this selected and I go over to MoGraph, you'll see we have different effectors here. And we could choose the random effector to randomize these a little bit. We can randomize their position a little bit to make them look a little bit more nature-like. We can randomize their rotation, and they'll look a little bit less consistent. Now, I realize that these are not on the ground, so we could add in a plane here for these to sit on. I don't want the Y direction randomized. I'm going to make this 0 so that they're all on the surface. And if you all are interested in learning about how to make grass, I'm happy to show that in the future. I'm going to add the dirt to the ground, dirt material. So that helps randomize the flowers a little bit. You could even randomize their scale by checking this on. I'm going to choose uniform scale, and that'll scale it uniformly in the X, Y, and Z. And I can just increase this a little bit. I'll try 0.5. So you can see we have quite a bit of variation. So that's a little bit exaggerated. We have some very big ones, very small ones. And maybe you wouldn't want that big of a difference between them. But it's a way to make the plants look a little bit different, even if you have a bunch of them. And it also helps prevent your computer from crashing. So it's useful for that as well. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you'd like to be notified when more videos come out, I come out with a new video each week. You can find them on my YouTube channel, Ambient 3D Animations. You'll be notified if you hit subscribe and ring that bell. Also, I just really appreciate that, and that helps me out and helps give me more motivation to make more videos, of course. And if you found this helpful, please hit like. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to watch these videos out of your busy day. So thank you so much. I hope to see you again soon.